Aunt Carol, be reasonable. The head table is for immediate family only. My nephew Jason said this to me not with an apology, but with a tone of mild irritation, as if I were a child demanding dessert before dinner. I was 68 years old, standing in the grand foyer of the Ocean View holding a silver platter of baklava I had painstakingly crafted for his rehearsal dinner. A dinner I had paid for in its entirety, the $18,500 venue fee, the imported soft-shell crabs, the champagne fountain that bubbled like the betrayal in my chest. I smiled, a thin, tight smile. I stayed quiet, and after the last toast glorifying the bride's parents, I picked up my phone and extinguished the lights on his wedding with 3 text messages. Subscribe if this story finds you, and tell me, where in the world are you listening from? There was no place card bearing my name, no reserved sign, just a weary-looking armchair tucked away in a sunroom that smelled of dust and neglect. Positioned between a dying ficus tree and a stack of forgotten board games, a single floor lamp cast a sickly yellow glow, a stark contrast to the dazzling crystal chandelier illuminating the dining room where my seat should have been. I clutched the baklava platter, my knuckles bleaching to the color of bone. I had worn my finest dress, a navy blue silk shift I'd saved for a year after my husband Arthur passed. My silver hair was coiffed into soft, elegant waves. I had wanted to look like the matriarch I was supposed to be. Instead, I felt like a forgotten piece of furniture, shoved into storage. The event coordinator, a young woman with a headset and a clipboard, gave me a pitying glance. "Mr. Thorne indicated you'd be most comfortable in here," she said, her voice professionally neutral. "He said the main dining room might be overstimulating for you." Overstimulating? I looked through the wide archway. I saw Jason, my Jason, the boy I'd raised, laughing with his arm around Chloe. And I saw Chloe's aunt, a woman I'd met exactly once at a brief lunch, seated proudly in my chair at the head table, the chair I had imagined for months, where I would beam with pride as speeches were made in honor of the nephew I loved as a son. The physical pain of the sight was a punch to my diaphragm, stealing my breath. My mind flashed back to a memory so vivid it hurt. Jason, at 7 years old, his small body racked with an asthma attack, his breathing a terrifying whistle. I was the one who held him in a steam-filled bathroom for hours, singing old hymns until his lungs relaxed and he fell into an exhausted sleep against my chest. His mother, my sister Linda, was always chasing the next big deal. Too busy for bedtime stories or rushed trips to the emergency room. I was the constant, the anchor. And I thought of the bank transfer confirmation on my phone. Invoice number 8824, $18,500. The memo line read, "Jason's rehearsal dinner, final payment." I sank into the armchair. The springs protested with a mournful creak. I set the baklava on a side table, next to a half-finished puzzle of a lighthouse. Each burst of laughter from the other room was a tiny, precise incision. Then, Chloe's father stood, clinking his glass. "To family," he boomed, his voice echoing with a confidence built on a foundation I had paid for. "To those who stand by you, no matter what." A roar of approval filled the air. Glasses clinked. I pressed the crisp linen napkin to my mouth, my eyes burning with unshed tears. I told myself it was the dust motes dancing in the lamplight, not the searing, absolute betrayal. But it was, and in the core of my being, something fundamental, the very bedrock of my identity as his caregiver, shattered into a million silent pieces. The true depth of the humiliation was that I endured it. I sat through the entire meal on a wobbly TV tray, eating cold salmon while listening to toasts that celebrated a unity from which I was explicitly excluded. As course followed course and speech followed speech, my emotions edged from raw hurt into a steadier, colder resolve. Clarity did not arrive all at once, but settled, degree by degree, with every clink of glass and practiced laugh from the other room. I watched Jason, my boy, never once glancing toward the sunroom, never sending a silent look of apology. He was utterly absorbed, seamlessly integrated into this new, shiny family that had no use for the woman who had built him. When the flourless chocolate torte, $300 upgrade I'd approved because Chloe simply adores chocolate, was sliced, I finally moved. My hands, which had trembled with hurt earlier that evening, were now perfectly steady. A cold, crystalline clarity had settled over me. I opened my phone. The text messages were surgical in their precision. To Coastal Blooms, florist, delivery for tomorrow's wedding brunch is cancelled, effective immediately. No further discussion required. Carol Simmons. 2 Main String Quartet. Your services for tomorrow's ceremony are terminated. You will receive the contracted cancellation fee via wire transfer within the hour. Carol Simmons. 2 The Ocean View and Management. The open bar tab for the wedding reception is cancelled as of 9 p.m. tonight. No exceptions. Carol Simmons. I felt no guilt, no regret, as I pressed send on each message. A spark ignited in the hollow of my chest, a flicker of power I hadn't felt since I held Arthur's hand as he took his last breath. It was the power of setting a boundary, the power of saying no more. I left without saying goodbye. I carried the pristine platter of baklava to my car and drove the hour back to my Portland, Maine cottage through a thick coastal fog that mirrored the haze in my soul. I didn't sleep. I hung the navy blue silk shift carefully back in its garment bag, pulled on a cream sweater and soft slacks, and sat by the window. I lay in my bed later, watching the moonlight trace the patterns on the quilt Arthur and I had picked out together, and I listened. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was spacious. It was mine. The next morning, my phone erupted. Missed calls from Jason, frantic voicemails from Chloe, text messages from my sister Linda that progressed from confused to furious. Carol, what is the meaning of this? The florist is on the phone. Jason is devastated. I silenced the phone. I brewed a pot of strong English breakfast tea, just the way Arthur liked it, and opened my laptop. I navigated to the folder labeled Jason's Wedding, a digital monument to my own foolishness. I knew every line item, every extravagant detail, because I had authorized each one. And that's when I found the final, twisting knife. 2 charges from the previous week. A bridal suite luxury upgrade for $500. A premium vintage champagne toast for $750. The description was a cold, clinical betrayal, per groom's request. It wasn't enough to banish me. He had been secretly pillaging my account, funding extra luxuries for his new family, without the decency of a conversation. The small spark in my chest flared into a righteous, cleansing fire. I walked to the mirror. The woman who stared back had eyes webbed with the lines of a life fully lived, of love, of loss, of sacrifice. But her gaze was unwavering. I saw Arthur's stubborn determination in the set of my jaw. The time for invisibility was over. I drafted 3 emails, my fingers striking the keys with definitive clicks. To the florist, confirming the cancellation and accepting the loss of the deposit as the cost of my freedom. To the musicians, a terse, professional termination notice. To the inn manager, a formal cancellation of the bar tab and a request for a final invoice, citing a fundamental breach of guests and host agreement. My words were polite, but they were armor-plated. But the emails were just the beginning. I needed the ultimate truth. I went to the hall closet and retrieved the small, fireproof lockbox from the top shelf. Inside, next to Arthur's simple gold wedding band, lay a single, fraying sheet of notebook paper. It was a note, written in my sister Linda's rushed, panicked script, 25 years earlier, when she'd abandoned a 6-year-old Jason on my doorstep with a single suitcase. Carol, I can't do this. He's too much. You're better at this. I'll send money when I can. Don't try to find me. She'd sent money sporadically, but I had raised him. I had been the one, at parent-teacher conferences, the one who taught him to drive, the one who held him when his first girlfriend broke his heart. By the calendar, Jason was 31 now, a groom with his own life arrayed before him, and yet the arithmetic of love still seemed to confuse him. I had become his mother in every way that mattered, until he found a newer, shinier model. The confrontation came on the 3rd day. Jason stood on my front porch, his face pale and twisted with a mixture of anger and panic. The charm he usually wore like a second skin was gone. How could you embarrass us like that? He spat, his voice trembling. You ruined our wedding day. Do you have any idea what you've done? I stood calmly in the doorway, the screen door between us like a metaphor. I didn't ruin your wedding, Jason. I simply stopped funding it. You made it abundantly clear I am not your family. Why would I finance a celebration for a family I'm not part of? He blinked, thrown by my calmness. That's not, it was just seating. Chloe's family is huge. We had to make compromises. I didn't engage. I simply held up my phone, displaying the bank statement with the unauthorized charges. And was this another compromise? Helping yourself to my money without asking. His bravado evaporated. His shoulders slumped. I was going to tell you. I was going to pay you back, were you? I asked, my voice soft but sharp as a scalpel. Then, I handed him the faded note from the lockbox. I have been paying for you since you were 6 years old, Jason. This was the first bill. I've paid it in full, with interest, for 25 years. He read his mother's words. His hands shook so violently the paper rattled. The truth, ancient and undeniable, filled the space between us. When he looked up, I no longer saw a man, but the lost, frightened little boy I had vowed to protect. Aunt Carol, he stammered. I was your family, I said, the weight of a quarter-century of sacrifice giving the words a profound gravity. But you can't relegate your family to the dusty sunroom and still expect them to finance the party. He had no response. He turned and walked away, the note clutched in his hand, a ghost of his past finally haunting him. The aftermath was turbulent. Linda called, screaming about blood and loyalty, but her words were just noise. The peace that settled in my cottage was absolute. I had reclaimed my territory, not just my finances, but my soul. In the quiet days that followed that doorstep conversation, I balanced my accounts, sat with my own thoughts, and spoke my plans out loud for the first time in years. The decision did not come as a rush. It unfolded gently, like a tide, steady, inevitable. By the end of the week, I had called a travel agent and chosen a small group itinerary that felt like breathing again. A week later, I didn't post a picture of a check. I posted a photo of my passport and a printed itinerary for a small group tour of the Greek Isles. A dream I'd buried with Arthur. The caption was simple. Some views are worth the wait, especially the ones you choose for yourself. The response was immediate. Messages from old friends, former colleagues, even strangers, flooded in. Carol, you're an inspiration. This gives me hope. One woman wrote, after reading your story, I canceled a trip I was dreading with my toxic daughter. I'm going to Paris alone. Thank you for the courage. Jason and I are estranged. The silence is the fertile ground where my new life grows. That's Sunroom. It's now my sanctuary, flooded with light from the windows I've cleaned. I placed a beautiful, comfortable chair where the old armchair was, and on the table next to it sits a photograph of Arthur and me on our wedding day, young and fiercely in love, a reminder of a bond that was never transactional. I learned that you can spend a lifetime building a home in someone else's heart, only to be evicted without notice. But I also learned that the most powerful redemption is to build a new home within yourself. And the book I served it last Tuesday to my book club, a group of witty, wonderful women who actually see me. They devoured it, asking for the recipe. Their enjoyment was a different kind of nourishment. It was a feast of respect. My worth is no longer negotiable.